Hi, this is Morley, and this is the M-Wire. Well, folks, there's a very interesting article that I'd like to share with you out of the BBC, and it's basically how do we know when the war in Ukraine has actually started? Now, before I get into this article, which this military analyst who wrote the article from the BBC makes some very valid points, it could be argued that the war in Ukraine started in 2014 when Russia annexed the Crimea. There has been approximately 14,000 casualties as a result since 2014, so it certainly pleads a case of not necessarily a full-scale war, obviously, but I mean, if people are losing their lives over territory, well, that implies that this war has been ongoing. It just hasn't been widespread like it has the potential to do now. Now, it's blatantly obvious that in the 21st century, war is fought much differently than in previous generations. As we saw recently, there was a cyber attack in the Ukraine affecting their infrastructure. Well, this just happened here, folks. Take a look at this short clip.
There's been a cyber attack on the Federal Department of Global Affairs, and Russia is suspected of being behind it. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson has more information on that. Mercedes.
Donna, the attack began on Friday, but Canadian security agencies are still actively dealing with the fallout as we speak tonight. Sources are describing the multi-day disruption as substantial, and both government and security sources tell Global News Russia or Russian-based hackers are believed to be behind it. The cyber attack comes after a Canadian intelligence agency warned of an impending Russian attack or attacks last week. Sources believe the cyber attack is in retaliation for Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly's trip to Ukraine and a Canadian promise of $120 million loan to Kyiv. It's unclear how much damage the attack may have caused or whether any information was compromised or stolen. Sources say the government expects more potential attacks in the future.
Canada has been very vocal in its support for Ukraine, as well as sending $120 million in aid for the potential war effort. So this is, in all likelihood, Russia's response. It's not proven at this time that Russia did it, but let's face it, Russia did it. I mean, I don't mean to, make them guilty before they are, but they're a very likely candidate to perpetrate this cybercrime. Now, whenever you attack a country's infrastructure, and I guess their Ministry of Global Affairs is their infrastructure, they created it and whatnot, so it's technically theirs. So this is a minor version of like a physical attack in a way on the internet. Now, this certainly swings the door wide open to ask a lot of questions. So if Canada can prove that Russia perpetrated this cyber attack, are they not well within their rights to retaliate? Can their cybersecurity experts in government there go launch a cyber attack on Russia if they can do it and it would be justified? Like I say, warfare is very, very different in the 21st century than previous generations. It's just true. Technology has enabled it. Since this just happened, it's too early to tell exactly what Canada's reaction will be. Perhaps if it can be proven that it was definitely Russia that did this, maybe they will be the first to start the sanctions. They will accept this as an attack on them, and they will deem it necessary to financially sanction Russia in some way, shape, or form as a result of this. I will say this, I think before a hot war potentially breaks out, I think we will see more of these cyber attacks. I would say that the UK is a prime candidate for a cyber attack because they've been very vocal against Putin. They're obviously supplying arms and munitions to the Ukrainian people for this potential war, so they're a likely candidate. I would say NATO is a likely candidate for a cyber attack for sure. Russia has made it obvious what it thinks of NATO these days, so that's very plausible as well. But this military journalist who wrote this article for the BBC makes some very plausible points, and I think it's worth going over. Let's get into it, shall we? Everyone is trying to second-guess Vladimir Putin's intentions in Ukraine. The U.S. is pulling embassy staff out as fears rise of looming conflict. But maybe it's already started, writes security and defense expert Jonathan Marcus. The risk of an all-out war between Russia and Ukraine dominates the headlines. All the obvious questions are being asked. Will Russia attack? Is President Vladimir Putin determined upon war come what may, or can diplomacy secure peace? But we cannot see inside President Putin's mind. So here's another question. How will we know when the hostilities commence? Clearly massed Russian tank formations crossing Ukraine's frontiers, or a massive rocket barrage or airstrikes against Ukrainian positions would mark a dramatic escalation in the crisis and a shift to a new phase of the conflict. The first alarms will come from the Ukrainian military itself, but Western military satellites and intelligence-gathering aircraft may well spot the preparations for an imminent offensive. There will probably be clear signs of an impending onslaught, says Michael Kaufman, an expert on the Russian military at the U.S.-based Center for Naval Analysis. Among them are the manning of formations, he said, since a lot of what has been deployed is heavy equipment rather than the troops themselves. Other signs could be the dispersal of forces, an influx of logistical and support elements, and a shift in fixing wing and rotary aviation. But the question can also be answered in another way, and for this we need to stand back and view the Russian campaign against Ukraine in its entirety. We need to look at the full toolkit available to Moscow and assess how it's being used. And in this light, when you ask, how will we know if the conflict has started? Then the answer may be that it already has. Hostilities have actually been underway for some years. Let's start from where we are. In practical terms, Russia already occupies Crimea, part of the Ukraine, and it provides practical assistance to the anti-Kiev rebels in the Donbass region. Indeed, it was the intervention of Russian armored and mechanized units against Russian forces in 2014 that prevented the pro-Russian rebels' defeat. Sporadic fighting has continued ever since. All sides supposedly support an international peace effort there, but little progress has been made. Beyond this pressure, there is also the threat to employ overwhelming military force. The buildup of Russian combat formations around Ukraine's borders is extraordinary. This includes a significant deployment of forces to Belarus, which also shares a border with Ukraine, which might provide a closer jumping-off point for an assault towards the Ukrainian capital of Kiev itself. Now, I just want to interject for a moment here, folks. All these troops on the border of Ukraine could be just a decoy, as I've said in the past. If Russia wanted to, with non-nuclear missiles, it could turn the city of Kiev into a parking lot, without sending a single solitary soldier over the border. That's definitely plausible. This buildup is referred to by Russian spokesmen as an exercise, and it is no sense threatening, but its scale, the nature of the units deployed, and the arrival of supplies and other enablers that this is much more than a routine maneuver. Analysts have followed the buildup using civilian satellite photos, numerous phone videos, and put online showing trains of equipment heading towards Ukraine or Belarus. And assessments of social media postings correlated with the units seen on the move provide a remarkable insight as to what's going on. Irrespective of what Moscow may say, Ukraine and its friends in the West have every reason to be worried. Given the fact, too, as well, they're conducting military exercises all over the world now, not just on their soil. Granted, they've been in international waters as far as the Navy's concerned, but they have now taken to conducting military exercises all over the world. The next tool available to Moscow is an attempt to influence the narrative. On one hand, Russia says it's not preparing for war, though it very much looks as though it is. But just as importantly, it has a story to tell, a narrative from far Ukraine being the victim, it is in fact Russia itself that is threatened. This is the substance of the documents handed over to the U.S. which seek to halt and in some ways reverse NATO expansion and create a new sphere of influence for Moscow. While some aspects of Russia's concerns like talks on strategic and other weapon systems are widely seen a good idea on NATO expansion, it is unlikely to get any change, and it probably knows this. But the narrative has another purpose too. It is the story that Russia tells to try to shape the way the whole Ukraine crisis is discussed, not just by Western governments or its own citizens, but by you and me reading and writing this. By all fair and rigorous independent analysis, Russia is preparing for war with Ukraine, whatever its official spokesman may say. There are other possibilities in the Russian toolbox too. Cyber attack and subversion, for example. Ukraine certainly has been the subject of the former. Just over a week ago, a number of government websites were hit. Though it was far from clear where the attack came from. More recently, the UK government has claimed evidence that Moscow has selected individuals to form a new government in Kiev, though whatever the suspicions, there has been no conclusive public evidence confirming Moscow's hand in such activities. Michael Kaufman says the cyber element could be an important part of any Russian attack because they can cripple critical infrastructure and disrupt Ukraine's ability to coordinate a military effort. Now, like I say, folks, Canada just had a cyber attack, in all likelihood from Russia. I want you to comment in the comments below, is Canada warranted to retaliate with a cyber attack, with sanctions? What should Canada do about this if it is proven that Russia is the perpetrator of this most recent cyber attack? When Russia seized Crimea, we heard a lot of talk about hybrid and gray zone warfare, and the alleged deniability of the operation whose participants, though uninformed, wore no military insignia. But there was no doubt who these troops were, and Crimea was seized with old-fashioned military force rather than by some esoteric modern method. What is underway is present as the essence of gray zone warfare, the blurring of the boundary between peace and war. That's not how we tend to view things in the West. But the Russian military has articulated a sophisticated doctrine that sees war and peace as a continuum where different tools are applied at different stages, sometimes in sequence, sometimes together, though with the same strategic aim. And that ultimately is why the conflict has already been joined. The only question is how far along the gray zone continuum President Putin is willing to go. I happen to think that was a very well thought out, well worded article. Let me know what you think though, folks. Has this war technically already started or no? Thank you so much for coming along with me to my update. Please remember to like, to comment, to share, and of course to subscribe. And until the next update, God bless.